After 28 years of marriage, I caught my husband and my younger sister cheating. I didn't scream. I just led them straight into my trap. I came home early on a Tuesday to surprise my husband with lunch, and I left without making a sound. Not because I was in shock, though I was, in the specific way of someone who has just received confirmation of something their body understood before their mind caught up. Not because I was afraid of what I might say. I left quietly because, in the 30 seconds I stood in the doorway of my own living room watching my sister sit on my husband's lap with her fingers in his hair, something happened inside me that I did not expect. I got very, very calm. I took one step backward, then another. Then I pulled the front door closed behind me with the same careful, gentle click I used when the children were small and I didn't want to wake them. I walked to my car. I put it in reverse. I drove 4 blocks to the park where I used to take Emily and Daniel for ice cream on summer evenings, the one with the old wooden benches facing the duck pond, and I sat on the bench I always sat on, and I thought for a long time. I did not cry. Not then. I want to be honest about that, because people expect tears to arrive immediately in a moment like that, and mine did not. What arrived instead was the cold, systematic clarity of a woman who has been good at solving problems her entire life, who has kept her own counsel since she was a girl, and who understood, sitting on that bench, watching 2 ducks paddle across still water in the afternoon light, that she was facing the most important problem she had ever been asked to solve, and that she was going to solve it correctly. When I drove away from that park an hour later, I had the shape of a plan. My name is Margaret Elaine Voss, though I was born Margaret Elaine Harwood, and I am 58 years old. I am a retired financial planner, 26 years at the same firm, partner for the last 11, the kind of career that requires you to be precise and patient and to understand, deeply and practically, that the decisions you make today determine the landscape you're navigating 5 years from now. I have been told by more than one colleague over the years that I am the most methodical person they know. I don't disagree. I married Robert Voss, 2 B's, a detail he was particular about, a quirk I had found endearing for 28 years, when I was 30 and he was 32, in a small ceremony in the garden of my mother's house in late September. He was an architect, handsome in the specific way of men who don't know they're handsome, with the ability to walk into a room and make the room feel considered. We had met at a dinner party hosted by a mutual friend, had our first date at an Italian restaurant on the east side of the city, and spent the following year doing the ordinary, irreplaceable work of learning who each other was. He was good to me. I want to say that because the story I'm telling is not a story about a marriage that was always wrong. It is a story about a marriage that was mostly good for a long time and then became something else. And the distinction matters. 28 years, 2 children, now adults. Emily, 26, a graphic designer in the city. Daniel, 23, finishing graduate school. A house we had chosen together, renovated twice, filled with the accumulated texture of a life shared. Saturday morning coffee and Sunday evening cooking, and the particular intimacy of knowing how another person sleeps. I had loved him. That's the part that sat in my chest on the bench by the duck pond, dense and unmovable. I had loved him, and he had looked me in the eye every morning for, I didn't know yet how long, but we will come to that, and chosen something else. My sister Kate is 4 years younger than me. She is 54, though she carries herself with the studied ease of someone working to occupy a different decade, and she has been, for as long as I can accurately remember, the kind of person who receives rather than gives, not maliciously. I want to be fair to the version of Kate I understood before that Tuesday, which is the version I lived with for 54 years. She was not a schemer in the way that word implies a calculating coldness. She was more like water. She moved toward the available space, she settled into whatever container was offered, and she accepted the filling up without particular reflection about where it came from. I had paid for her college tuition after our father died because she was 21 and there was no other way, and I was 25 and had a job, and it seemed like what you did. I had let her stay in our guest room for 3 months when her second marriage ended. I had answered calls at midnight and lent money without conditions and shown up to things she said mattered, and I had done all of it because she was my sister, and I believed that what you gave to the people you loved came back around in ways that didn't have to be tracked. I had been wrong about the tracking. I had also, and this is the part I have had to sit with, been wrong about something I smelled and explained away. Robert had kissed my cheek before leaving for work the morning of that Tuesday, and I had noticed, in the quick half-attention of a long married morning, a scent that was not his soap, not his usual aftershave, something floral and musky that I associated, when I brought it fully to the front of my mind later, on the park bench, with something I had been handed at Christmas, Kate's perfume. I had given it to her in December, a small luxury she'd mentioned wanting, the kind of thing sisters notice about each other, the kind of thing you pick up without being asked because picking up small things without being asked is how you show people you're paying attention. I had smelled it on Robert's collar before that Tuesday, on at least 3 separate mornings, and I had found a different explanation every time. A hug at a family gathering, a crowded elevator, ambient scent transferring in a shared space. I had explained it until I couldn't. Then Kate called the week after I came home early, and she came for dinner, and she hugged me at the door and said, "You're the best sister in the world. I don't tell you that enough." Her eyes were damp when she said it. I thought she was being sincere. I had smiled and said nothing, because something that had started forming on that park bench was already too far along to interrupt with an accusation I could not yet prove, because I already had the shape of a plan. I just needed to build it. The first person I called was my attorney. attorney, Victor Chessman. Victor Chessman of Chessman and Hale Family Law, 22 years of practice, a man who had handled the estate documentation when my mother died, and who possessed the specific quality I have always valued most in professional relationships. He asked the questions that needed to be asked and did not insert himself into questions that were mine to answer. I had called him on my cell phone from the park bench before I drove home, and we had spoken for 30 minutes. And when I hung up, I had a clear picture of my position, the prenuptial agreement. Robert had signed it 28 years ago, before the wedding, with the gentle condescension of a man who considers such documents unnecessary in a marriage as solid as ours. "You know, I'd never," he had said, and I had said, "I know, but paper remembers things differently than people do." I had said that, and I didn't even know yet that I had inherited the line from my mother, who had said something similar to me the week she died. The prenuptial agreement stated, among other provisions, that the house and the investment accounts inherited from my parents remained my separate property regardless of the marriage, and that in the event of infidelity, confirmed by documentary evidence, I retained full ownership of both the house and all accounts in my name. Robert had called it unnecessary. Victor confirmed it was airtight. The second piece arrived 10 days after the park bench, from a source I had not anticipated. My mother, Eleanor Harwood, had died 3 years prior, after a brief illness, at 79. She had been, in the way of certain women of her generation, a person of great practical wisdom and very little sentimentality, who expressed her love through action rather than declaration, and who had understood her daughters with a clarity that neither of us, I think, had fully appreciated while she was alive. In the week before she died, she had pressed a sealed envelope into my hand and said only, "Keep this. You may not need it, but if you do, you'll know." I had put it in her safety deposit box, which I had retained access to, and I had not opened it, because 3 years of not needing it had suggested I might never need it. I drove to the bank on the Wednesday after that Tuesday. I sat in the parking lot and opened the envelope. 6 sentences in my mother's handwriting, the careful, upright cursive of a woman who had taken penmanship seriously and never stopped. "Margaret, Kate loves being taken care of. She always has. I spent years making excuses for it. One day she may ask for more than you should ever give. If that day comes, choose yourself." I sat with that for a long time. My mother had written those words at some point in her final week of life. She had folded them, sealed them, pressed them into my hand. She had known something, or suspected something, or simply understood her younger daughter well enough to see a shape that hadn't fully formed yet, and she had left me the only thing she could, a permission slip. Choose yourself. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, put the envelope in my bag. Then I called Victor back and asked him to prepare the divorce papers. Then I drove home and told Robert I wanted to host a birthday dinner. The security camera had been installed 2 years ago after a break-in 2 streets over that had unnerved the neighborhood for a month. Robert had arranged the installation, a system with 4 exterior cameras and a cloud storage backup, accessible from an app on my phone. I had never used the app except once, briefly, to confirm the installation was working. I opened it 3 days after I talked to Victor. I was not, by that point, looking for anything specific. I had what I needed for the legal process. What I was looking for, if I am honest about my state of mind in those days, the state of mind of a woman who is functioning very competently on the surface, while something underneath is working through a kind of grief she is not yet ready to fully sit with, was the full picture. I wanted to know the shape of what had been happening in my own house. The app allowed me to browse archived footage by date. I did not need to watch very much. A still image from a Thursday afternoon 4 weeks prior was sufficient. I could describe it, but I don't think I need to. What it showed was enough to constitute documentary evidence, which is what Victor had told me I needed, and it showed it clearly and without ambiguity, on a timestamp that was date-stamped and time-stamped by the system. I printed it at the office supply store across town, not at home. I slid it into a manila folder. I placed the folder in the drawer of my bedside table, under a novel I had been reading for 3 months without finishing. Then I began preparing the birthday dinner. I want to tell you about the 2.5 weeks between the park bench and the dinner, because those 2.5 weeks are the part of the story that no one sees from the outside. Robert and I continued our mornings. Coffee, the news, the ordinary small transactions of a shared life. He kissed my cheek, I kissed his. I asked about his projects, and he asked about my day, and we ate dinner and watched television, and went to sleep in the same bed. And I did all of this with a steadiness that surprised even me, because I had expected it to be harder. I had expected my performance to crack somewhere, for the grief or the anger to surface through some involuntary seam. It didn't. I don't know entirely what to make of that. My therapist, Dr. Judith Calloway, who I began seeing 3 weeks into the process, a clinical psychologist with 18 years of practice and an expertise in transitions and betrayal, told me that the steadiness wasn't numbness. It was, she said, the way certain people process trauma, by moving, by building, by converting the energy of what they cannot yet feel into the precision of what they need to do. She said this as though it were neutral, which I appreciated, because some people would have said it as a concern. I was not numb, I was working. Kate called twice during those 2.5 weeks. I answered both times. I talked to her the way I always talk to her. She sounded both times like a person maintaining something that required maintenance, and I let her maintain it, and I said nothing that wasn't ordinary, and I felt the specific, sustained effort of a woman holding a breath underwater with a countdown in her head. The dinner was set for a Saturday, my actual birthday, which had had the clean appropriateness of a situation where the occasion and the resolution could be the same event. I called Emily and Daniel and told them I was hosting a small birthday dinner and I wanted them there. I called my friend Helen Marsh. Helen and I had been close since our children were in school together, a friendship of the kind that doesn't require constant maintenance because its foundation is solid enough to hold, and invited her. I called Kate and told her it was my birthday and I was making dinner and I wanted her there. She said she wouldn't miss it for anything, and her voice had the quality of a person trying very hard to mean something they're saying. I called Robert's cell phone, which was unnecessary since I would see him at dinner, but I wanted the call on the record. I want to have people for my birthday, I told him. Small. Our children. Helen, Kate, he said. That's a lot of work, which was such a specifically Robert thing to say, practical to the edge of missing the point, that for a moment it knocked something loose in my chest that I had to work to resecure. It's my birthday, I said. Of course. He paused. Let me know what you need. I squeezed his arm when he came through the door that evening, the way a loving wife would, the way I had squeezed it 1,000 times. His hand covered mine for a moment. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. I thought, paper remembers the truth. I went to set the table. I used my mother's linen tablecloth, which I only brought out for occasions that deserved it. I used the silver I hadn't polished in 3 years, and I spent a Saturday afternoon polishing it, which is the kind of task that occupies the hands and releases the mind. And I thought, while I polished, about my mother pressing that envelope into my hand and the clarity of 6 sentences that had been waiting 3 years to be necessary. I arranged Kate's lilies in the center of the table. She had brought them as a hostess gift the week prior, not for the birthday dinner, but for a casual dinner, and I had kept them and they were still fresh, and I centered them between the candles and thought about the specific irony of that, which was either poetic or simply accurate depending on how you looked at it. The folder went beside my wine glass, the contents, the still image from the security camera, the divorce papers Victor had prepared and that I had already signed, and the prenuptial agreement, and my mother's letter in its envelope, which I had decided to include because it belonged in the room for reasons that had nothing to do with law and everything to do with truth. I lit the candles at 6:15. They all arrived between 6:30 and 6:45. Emily first. She always arrived on time, a quality she had inherited from me, and she looked beautiful in the way young women look when they don't yet know it. In a green dress, her dark hair up, she hugged me and said happy birthday and went to help in the kitchen. Daniel next, with a bottle of wine I could tell he'd taken care to choose, and a card he handed me at the door with the slightly self-conscious warmth of a young man who is still learning how to perform his feelings in public. I kissed his cheek. Helen, at 6:40, in the burgundy blazer she wore to things that mattered, with flowers and the steady present energy of a person who knows without being told when a situation is significant. She looked at the table, at the silver and the linen and the careful arrangement of things, and then at me, and I saw in her eyes the question she didn't ask, and I answered it with nothing more than the particular quality of how I was standing. She understood. She sat down and said nothing. Robert came down from the bedroom at 6:45, changed from his work clothes with the ease of a man in his own home. He looked around the table with the appreciating expression of someone who had not expected the occasion to be this assembled, this formal. He said it looked wonderful. He pulled out my chair. I let him. Kate arrived at 6:52, in a dress I had seen before, a blue wrap dress she wore to things she wanted to look good for. She swept in and kissed my cheek and said, happy birthday. Sis, you look radiant, and her eyes were bright, and her smile was the smile I had been looking at for 54 years, and I held her hug for 2 seconds, and then stepped back and told her to sit down. We were all at the table by 7 o'clock. The appetizers came. I had made things I knew everyone liked, because even now, even in this, I was the kind of hostess who thought about what people liked. The candles were burning. My mother's linen was perfect. The lilies were in the center of the table. I waited until the appetizer plates were cleared. Then I tapped my glass. The sound of crystal struck once, clean and clear. I stood. Every face at my table turned toward me. Emily, with the open, comfortable attention of a daughter at her mother's birthday dinner. Daniel, raising his wine glass slightly in an instinctive toast posture. Helen, with her hands folded on the tablecloth, very still. Robert, with the particular expression he wore when he expected something warm and public and wanted to be appropriately responsive. Kate, with the smile beginning to thin at its edges. Before we eat, I said, I'd like to say a few words. Everyone settled. Robert smiled. I want to start by saying how much I appreciate all of you being here. My wonderful children. I looked at Emily, at Daniel. My dear friend. I looked at Helen, who looked back at me steadily. My husband of nearly 3 decades. I looked at Robert, and his smile held. And, of course, my sister. Kate's smile did something complicated at the word sister. A small rebalancing, barely visible. I've been thinking a great deal recently about what it means to be loyal. I spoke with the even cadence I used in professional presentations, the one that conveys complete composure regardless of what is happening underneath, about what we owe the people we love, about what we choose when the choosing is hard. I opened the folder. Last Tuesday, I left work early, across the table, and this was the moment I had prepared for, the moment I watched for. Robert and Kate exchanged a glance. Fast, involuntary, the glance of 2 people sharing information without words, a communication so habitual it happened before either of them could prevent it. Emily saw it. She looked at her father. I came home to surprise my husband, I said. Instead, I was the one surprised. I lifted the printed still image from the security camera. camera. I held it so that everyone at the table could see it clearly. The room went completely silent. Not the polite silence before a toast. The airless, absolute silence of a room in which something irrevocable has just become visible. Emily's jaw dropped. Daniel put his wine glass down with the slow, deliberate movement of a person whose hands need somewhere to be. Helen covered her mouth with both hands. Kate went the color of old paper. Robert's chair scraped back by half an inch, an involuntary recoil, the body responding before the mind could intervene. As all of you can see, I said, my sister and my husband have been having an affair. The silence lasted 3 more seconds. Then Emily turned to her father. How could you? Not a question. A statement, delivered in the flat, definitive tone of a young woman whose understanding of a person has just been permanently rearranged. Robert found his voice. It came out wrong. Too fast. Too eager for the wrong kind of resolution. Margaret, please, let me— This isn't— No. Daniel's voice was quiet and absolute. He was looking at his father the way you look at something you're trying to recognize and can't. There is no explanation. I reached back into the folder. Kate, she had not moved. She was the color she had gone when I held up the photograph, and she was very still, the specific stillness of a person who has calculated every possible response and found that none of them are available. Mom left me something when she died. I kept it in her safety deposit box. I never showed it to you. Kate's voice came out unsteady. Margaret, that isn't fair, I said. The word came out neutrally. I wasn't asking. She stood up. Please. I raised my voice by exactly the amount needed to carry the letter over hers. Margaret, Kate loves being taken care of. She always has. I spent years making excuses for it. One day she may ask for more than you should ever give. If that day comes, choose yourself. The table was absolutely still. I folded the letter. Kate sat back down. Her cheeks were burning. Her eyes were bright in the specific way of a woman who is deciding whether to cry and has not yet decided. I did not wait for her to decide. I reached into the folder one last time. 2 documents. I placed the first in front of Robert. He looked down. Divorce papers, I said. Already signed. Then the second. He looked at it. The color left his face with a speed that, under other circumstances, might have concerned me medically. It happened fast. A visible draining, as if something structural had been removed. That is the prenuptial agreement you signed 28 years ago, I said. The one you told me was unnecessary. It states that in the event of infidelity confirmed by documentary evidence, which we now have in triplicate, I retain full ownership of this house. The investment accounts from my mother's estate remain mine entirely. I paused. Victor Chessman of Chessman & Hale has reviewed everything. He sends his regards. Nobody at the table moved. Nobody spoke in Robert's defense. Nobody spoke in Kate's. Emily had both hands flat on the table. Daniel had not looked away from the divorce papers. Helen had lowered her hands from her mouth and was sitting with a kind of upright, contained witness. The posture of someone who came to dinner and found themselves in history. I smoothed my dress. I stood. I walked to the front door. I opened it. Robert pushed his chair back. He gathered the divorce papers without looking at me. He picked up his jacket from the hook by the door where it had hung for 11 years, without lifting his eyes, and he walked out of his house and did not look back. I did not watch him go. I turned to Kate. She was standing at the threshold between the dining room and the hallway. She had followed me, some instinct for the last word still operating, and she was standing in my house for what we both understood was the last time, with her mouth open and the blue wrap dress and the damp eyes she always had when she was about to ask me for something. She did not find the words. I shut the door in her face. The candles were still burning. My mother's linen was still perfectly pressed. Kate's lilies were still in the center of the table. I walked back to my chair. I sat down. I lifted the wine bottle, a Burgundy I had opened an hour before dinner, to let it breathe, because even now, even in this, I was the kind of person who let the wine breathe, and I poured a glass. Emily was crying. Not loudly, the quiet, sustained kind, with her hands in her lap and her jaw set. She was her mother's daughter in that, and I felt the particular, complicated love of a mother, watching her child be strong through something they didn't deserve to have to be strong through. Daniel was not crying. He was sitting very straight with his hands folded on the table, staring at the place where his father's plate had been, doing the same work I had done on the park bench, building a new understanding of something he had believed he already knew. Helen was looking at me. I looked back at her. We had been friends for 22 years, and I had called her last week and said only, "Can you come to my birthday dinner? I need a witness." And she had said, "I'll be there," and she had been, and she had witnessed, and now she was looking at me with the expression of someone who has just watched a person do the hardest thing they will ever do and do it without falling apart. "How long?" Emily asked. Her voice was steady. She was asking me. "I don't know," I said. "Long enough." She nodded. We sat there, my daughter, my son, my friend, and I, at my mother's table with the silver and the linen and the candles and the lilies, and the birthday dinner I had made for an occasion that was not the occasion anyone had arrived expecting, and nobody moved for a long moment. Then Daniel reached across the table and filled his wine glass. Then Emily did the same. Then Helen. We lifted our glasses. No one said anything, because sometimes the right thing is to say nothing, and simply hold the moment between you, and we held it, and I felt the breath I had been holding underwater for 2.5 weeks release itself completely. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized in March, faster than Victor had expected, because Robert did not contest the prenuptial agreement, possibly because contesting it would have required a legal process that would have made the documentary evidence even even more public than it already was, and possibly because, underneath everything, he understood that what it said was what he had agreed to, and what he had agreed to was what he had done. He is renting an apartment on the west side of the city. I know this the way you know things in a city where you have lived for 30 years, through the ordinary channels of mutual acquaintance and overheard information. I don't track him. I don't need to. Kate has not contacted me. I expected this. It is the kind of silence that belongs to people who have run out of the performances that usually resolve things for them, and who have not yet found the version of themselves that knows how to apologize without a strategy attached. Maybe she will. Maybe she won't. My mother knew her better than I did, and my mother wrote 6 sentences instead of a longer letter, which suggests she understood the limits. Emily calls twice a week. She came over last month and we made dinner together, the two of us in the kitchen with the radio on, and she said something I will not repeat here because it belongs to the private record between a mother and her daughter, and it was enough. Daniel drove 3 hours from his graduate program to be there for the divorce finalization. He sat in Victor's waiting room and read a book and said nothing except, when we came out and the paperwork was signed, take me to lunch. We went to the Italian place on the east side, which was not intentional, and we ate pasta and talked about his thesis and his plans and the ordinary forward motion of a young man's life, and I paid the check, and he didn't argue about it, and that was everything. Helen and I have dinner every other Thursday. I see Dr. Calloway on Tuesdays.